My number 3 movie that shaped my sense of humor is 1989's UHF. So this is a film directed by Jay Levy, starring Weird Al Yankovic, Victoria Jackson, Michael Richards, and Fran Drescher. And the IMDb plot is an unemployed visionary becomes the manager of a local television station. The station becomes a success with all sorts of hilarious sight gags and wacky humor. So this is a vehicle for Weird Al Yankovic, who is a artist, recording artist, also comedian. He does song parodies as well as other funny songs that he writes himself. And I first saw this movie on VHS in the early 90s. I'd already known about Weird Al at the time and actually didn't even know he had a movie. As a young kid growing up in the late 80s, especially as a boy, Weird Al was definitely a big influence over, kids on the schoolyard, everyone talking about Weird Al Yankovic. He definitely spoke to kids a lot in terms of his nature of humor. And for me, the reason why this film, as I was looking back over my sense of humor now and, where I can trace it back to, the fact that this humor in this film is very good-natured, coming from a good place, but then also still like punching up essentially at the bad guys in this film, who are like the last film you talked about, are also portrayed as goofy and funny. But the expenses are never taken at the jokes are never at the expense of the main characters.
Right.
But there's also a very this movie's really dumb, very goofy. There's a very fine line between stupid and clever, and I think Weird Al walks that line in his music, and then definitely in this film too. There's a lot of big sight gags of at this TV station that they're at. There's a lot of satires and parodies of different types of TV shows that they're now putting on, movie parodies. I mean, there's definitely that Weird Al parody flavor in this. But again, all the humor for me was always something that was very good-hearted, which is important to my sense of humor. There's also a lot of very good quotable lines in it, which is something too that for me, as I looked over my humor, the type of humor that I identify with was a lot of these cult humor, where there's a cult forming around a personality or a particular film where you can quote those lines, and it's kind of like you're on the inside, like the inside jokes because you can quote these lines from UHF and you can talk to other Weird Al fans and talk about your favorite bits. So there's this social aspect of connecting with other fans. But because this movie too was notoriously a big box office bomb, it was not looked upon as popular at the time, that it sort of made it a little bit irreverent too. Like, oh, I'm cool. Like I like UHF and got it. I got the humor, and who else got it with me? So there was definitely a lot of sense of that too, where a lot of my humor comes from not more like giant mainstream comedic stars or comedic films that were very popular in the States at the time. There was always some little edge to it. And that edge was that cult element of it. Which I think this movie exemplifies really well. This movie, just again, I watched it I think twice in preparation for this. It's been a long time since I've seen it. Oh, and also too, I think with the musical element of it, there's a couple. There's one musical parody sequence. It made me realize too that is also a very big part of my sense of humor. I gravitate towards movies or shows where music comedy is a big part of what it's trying to do. South Park always has, which is a show I like, a lot of musical elements in it. Their films, the Trey Parker, Matt Stone, who did South Park. The South Park movie is a musical. Team America, another film, they did a lot of music in that. Spinal Tap, A Mighty Wind. These are all movies that music is a core part of it, because I just find music comedy very funny. And I think that this movie was a big part of that as well. So yeah, still find it funny to this day. Still love Weird Al Yankovic. I'm actually seeing him 5 different times on tour this year, on his tour, 5 different shows. So I'm still a big fan of his. And this movie is still one of my favorite comedies, but then also is a very important part of why I feel like I find certain things funny today.
That's awesome. Well, I didn't even know that he was still alive, so that's good to know.
He's alive. He's had his first #1 album a couple years back, and he's almost bigger than ever. It's actually amazing of how every generation of kids, he finds a way, at least in the US, like a way into being like their favorite guy for a period of time. It's almost like a rite of passage. You go through this Weird Al phase as a kid, and just he's able to have that staying power is just phenomenal.
That's amazing. So I had heard of this name, but I never watched or heard anything of his
Oh,
until
okay.
watching this movie. So I'm very glad that you put this on the list. I mean, I can so picture it that if I had gotten into this person, say at our age when you were,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah, at like 8.
boy,
Yeah,
this would have stuck with me for sure. It's kind of a different kind of experience, you know, getting to this at age 40.
right.
Because it is very goofy, it is very dumb.
Hmm.
I will say though that I was not bored at all. I was invested. There is something about going back to my thing of sort of the truth behind
Hmm.
what the character is trying to seek. There's something about that aspect that comes across, and maybe it's the music, maybe it's his hair, who knows? There's a lot at play, and I think that kept me very invested in his journey, and you know, the janitor and
Yeah.
everybody who's sort of around him. I don't know if I laughed out loud, but I think that has to do a lot with when are you meeting this person in your life.
Right, right.
You know, that said, it was super clever. All the gags and parodies, not all of them landed on me because they're obviously referencing shows and such
Right.
from a time that I was not watching those shows, but a lot of those did make sense to me. So yeah, I'm actually now excited to watch more of his stuff or listen to his stuff because this is my first intro, but I'm very glad that I watched it.
Yeah, no, I never really thought about this as if I were to introduce someone to Weird Al Yankovic, would this be the first thing that they see? Because if you haven't even heard of any of his famous like parody songs, yeah, that's interesting. Curious now, or that was very interesting to me to hear what you were saying in terms of how he landed with you as a comedic personality. And I think this movie perfectly exemplifies that. So, you know, I don't think this movie is a misnomer in terms of what you get out of his music. Like him as an artist, he expresses himself in a similar way through his music and his in his stage show and the different TV shows that he's been on too. But yeah, no, it must be it definitely is a movie that as a kid lands really well. And it's hard for me to understand how it would look like if I had only seen this movie at 40 and not at 8 and then dozens of times after it. But yeah, no, I'm glad you were engaged and found his character charming.
Yeah, and there's kind of a sweetness to him, you know, which is very endearing. And even though silly things are happening to him and he's doing silly things as well, and they're cringeworthy moments and all of that, but there's something sweet, which I think is important to your point on, you know, not making humor at the expense of others, but there's also something to be said about the person who is making the humor. What is their mental makeup?
Right.
And I don't know. I gravitate towards people who are doing silly things, who are also sweet, as opposed to, you know, mean-spirited or sharp. And there's a place for that. You know, I'm all for dark comedy as well. But yeah, there's something sweet about him.
Yeah, he has this innocence and childlike wonder to him that is very endearing. It's very endearing. No matter, even though how dumb some of the humor might be around that. I do find it very endearing, unlike, you know, some of the mean-spirited sort of like Farrelly Brothers films don't really take to me. I had a very big issue with Bridesmaids, the film that came out maybe like 10 years ago, as just being very mean-spirited, where the humor is not coming from a good place. And I think a lot of that goes down to, like you were saying, the personalities of Weird Al, just like he's basically a kid. You know, he has that same mentality as an innocent kid, and that's how he looks at the world, and that's what the humor comes from. And that is something that I gravitate towards a lot. It just makes me feel good, like that childlike wonder comes back in his gags and in his comedy.
Hey there, it's Alex. If you like the review and discussion Karan and I just had, make sure you subscribe to our channel, Movies That Shaped Us, to get full episodes. Every other Wednesday, Karan and I cover a topic around important people, places, events, and moments in our lives, and then explore it through 3 of our favorite movies. Subscribe right now, or follow our podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts via the link in the description below. Hope you join us for the journey.